to Cyber Sidekicks, the weekly cybersecurity podcast hosted by Richmond Advisory Group's principal analysts, namely me, Christina Richmond.
And me, Rory Duncan. This podcast is your go-to partner for understanding the cybersecurity market, industry trends, and the real-world challenges of protecting organizations today. Hello, Christina.
Hey, how are you, Rory? How's Edinburgh today?
Edinburgh is wet and dank and dark and miserable. However, fantastic score by Scotland in the soccer, which is football, of course, in the real world, recently has blown away all the gloom and doom that could possibly be. So, even though we're not over there, I know folks who have been visiting the US from Scotland for the football have been really very much enjoying visiting Boston in particular, and I think the Bostonians have enjoyed having the Scots as well. So that's good.
Oh, there's so many videos, of the bagpipes and the march, the Scottish march through Boston, and it was great. It was just so great to see, and it's a big deal. The World Cup is a big deal, but it's so expensive. Yeah. Friends of mine wanted to go to Seattle for one of the games, and they're huge World Cup supporters, and no way, $1,500, $2,000, I don't know, just ridiculous prices for a seat.
Yeah, I think it seems as if there's been a bit of a money grab going on, because certainly the promises that were made back in the day were for certain maximums of tickets prices, and actually they've gone very much through the roof, sometimes multiples of what that would be. So, but without getting into rant, because that could easily happen, let's talk about today's show. In fact, before we talk about the show, let's talk about the newsletter. So again, shout out to new subscribers for the newsletter, and a call for those who are not subscribed to do so via our website at richmondadvisorygroup.com. Now, we've got a few things in the most recent newsletter. I may have overlapped it with the information about the previous newsletter. So what do we have in our latest issue?
Well, last week we had the Cisco Live stuff and some of our YouTube shorts. But this week we have Simon Hunt from Securonix. He's the head of product for them. We do a little call out of his podcast visit with us from this week. And then we talk about the fact that Cyber Sidekicks has grown up and is looking for patrons.
Yes, we very much are. We're at the point where we'd be very interested in chatting with anybody who would like to look at potentially sponsoring us. We have a pretty good offering, and if you are serious about it, please let us know.
Yeah, and there's extra perks and whatnot for being a patron. And anyway, so that's part of the issue in the newsletter. And so it's a quick, short newsletter this week. We'll probably have more next week, something on the identity market, I would imagine.
Yes.
Because that's what we're talking about this week.
That's right. We have a special episode this week, folks. And we know that you, the listeners, have been enjoying our monthly deep dives into the various state of the market. And how do we know
that? Rory, let's tell them how we know that.
Well, we know that from the number of downloads and listens that we've had, which is great. So that's awesome. We enjoy doing them. We enjoy having guests and doing news, but we're very pleased that you guys find it useful and interesting. And just a quick recap for those newer listeners who've perhaps not heard them yet. We have produced guides this year so far to the MDR market. We had one on the governance and compliance market. And then most recently, the threat hunting market, haven't we?
Yeah, and they were all fun. I think the MDR market had the most downloads, if I recall.
Yes.
And, I think identity is another hot one. It's obviously a very dynamic, changing market. So I'll be curious to see how the downloads are for it.
Yes, exactly. So thanks, folks, for listening to that. As you know, you can always dip into our archive of 72 previous episodes, and you'll probably find something in there of interest to you.
We hope so, yeah. Yeah, I listened to last week's episode and I listened to it at 1.5 speed, and it's really funny to listen to it. But it is a way that a lot of people listen to podcasts. I listen to podcasts that way. So, a 40-minute show becomes what, 30 minutes. If you can tolerate the the double speed, the 2x speed, which my son tolerates well, then it's a 20-minute show. So you could dip into the archives and blast through some of the episodes if you're interested.
Yeah, and if you don't mind listening to chipmunks speaking about cybersecurity, then please use that speed setting.
What were the name of the chipmunks? Alvin, and I've got to find the names, but they were the chipmunks of my youth.
Yeah.
The cartoon chipmunks, Alvin and the chipmunks. Anyway, sorry, that's a digression. But hey, we're going to talk about identity this week. So,
let's get cracking on that.
Let's get cracking.
So, Christina, the identity market.
We're jumping right in. In. I thought you were going to pause. Okay.
No, we're going to go straight in.
We're going straight in.
We are. No messing about. So
I was straightening my tie and adjusting my seat, and okay,
fine.
Well, let's start with some history then, shall we?
Yeah, and we did this before, folks. So just to precursor it, we do a little bit of where it's from. That's important. We don't, you can't really understand. Well, it's difficult to predict where things are going if you don't know where they've been. I think it's probably safe to say. So.
Right. Yeah. So identity didn't start in security. It was an IT tool. HR used it for onboarding and offboarding. Deprovisioning is the proper term. Folks who were, either joining the company or leaving the company. And, it was a password reset kind of tool, right?
Yeah, definitely. It used to sit very close to the employee life cycle, which I think is what you were hinting at.
That's exactly it.
So HR creates a record, IT creates the account, then someone provisioned the email, a network login, access to a few business applications. For any of you who've worked in any size of an organization, that tends to be how things start. And then conversely, when you leave, somebody then switches everything off or deprovisions the account. The biggest issues, though, were often operational. Maybe too much manual work, too many tickets. You turn this on, turn that off. Does this person still have access? Do they not? Why not? Too many orphaned accounts that were just kind of hanging around, and too many passwords. And I've also seen this. People who should have left the company, well, they did leave the company, but their accounts were open for some reason still, or they could still get access to something, which is obviously a significant risk.
That's a big problem. And it became a bigger problem, right? Because it wasn't initially about adversaries. It was about, just the day-to-day operations. But we needed to start having a directory of the who, what, when, where, why, and the policies and the password management, right? And do we have, are we giving Rory the right access? We shouldn't give him privileged access because, we don't know. He's really low on the totem pole.
Yeah.
But so Active Directory became foundational, and over time, governance tools emerged because we needed that who, what, when, where, why, and how, and we needed to be able to track it.
I blame the internet. Well, I blame a bunch of things,
Well, and you'd be right, actually.
So, the enterprise suddenly had, SaaS to contend with, cloud, everything, remote work, devices logging in from here, there, and everywhere. So the idea that the perimeter of the network could effectively define the trust that was required or expected started to weaken. So,
absolutely. The old castle and moat it crumbled.
Exactly. So you might be sitting at home on a personal network, accessing a cloud application, which is a corporate cloud application, organizational one that never touches the corporate data center. So at that point, identity started to become effectively the control point. It wasn't part of an operational back office workflow.
Yeah, or it's both and, because it was part of a back office workflow that also needed to migrate to this new perimeter concept. And it's been overused. I'll grant the market, that yes, identity is the new perimeter, and people say data is the new perimeter, and I think both are. But, when an application is in the cloud and the device might be unmanaged, it might be bring your own device to anywhere, right?
Yeah.
Then you really do have to ask the question, do we trust this person, this identity in this context? And that becomes really key. And taking a specific action right now. Do we trust them?
Yeah, do we trust them? So effectively that meant, back to the beginning of the conversation, that identity moved much closer to security. Yeah. Things like single sign-on, multi-factor authentication, privileged access management, identity governance, and then eventually zero trust all became part of that same broad conversation. And all of those things we've talked about a lot in the last 72 episodes.
So just to recap, the first generation of identity controls, were like the front door event. They treated authentication as just getting you in the front door. They didn't worry about what happened when you were inside the house. Modern identity security has to be more contextual, right? Yep. Where is the device? Is this the usual activity with this device? Is the user suddenly accessing data that they really shouldn't touch? Is it a privileged account being used at an odd time? Right? All of those things become really critical.
Yeah. It's kind of like, it reminds me of when I let the cats into the house.
Of course you're going to talk about the cats.
It's their house, fine. But when they come in the front door, they might go and eat something that they shouldn't, scavenge. They maybe, throw up on the carpet. They may just run around like crazy and attack things. Or all of the above. You have to consider what they're doing and where they are, what time of day it is, whether they're hungry or not, are they going to sleep or not, all these different things. And there we go. That's pretty much like the way that identity is developed.
You made me laugh so hard. I had to go on mute because I was choking.
Well, there we go.
I love it that you brought the cats in.
Oh, yes. We always look for the animal analogies in this program. So all of that kind of leads up to where we are now. So identity has become one of the most important attack paths because attackers do not always need to hack in. Right? They can, like the cats, they can just be let in.
They can just come in the cat door.
And the cat flap or the open kitchen window. So they log in. They use credentials obtained through phishing, info stealer malware, session theft, password reuse, social engineering, or gaps in the process of somebody joining, moving somewhere else, leaving, etc. That bit about the HR thing we talked about. So there's a whole bunch of things that they can sort of legitimately enter a network on or log in, and perhaps we don't even know. So
yeah, and IBM X-Force says that identity-based attacks accounted for approximately 30% of total intrusions in 2025, right?
Yeah, that's an awful lot.
It's a lot. I mean, whether somebody puts the number higher or lower, the direction, the trajectory is clear.
Yeah, right.
Valid credentials are extremely valuable to attackers because the attacker then gets to look real and legitimate, at least at first.
Yeah. So basically, the attacker's playbook has become much more sophisticated. And if we're talking about, logging in rather than hacking in, so this could be MFA fatigue attacks, help desk manipulation, thinking that they're the person and they're not. We've talked in the past on the show about, deep fake voice, deep fake video, fake employees, fraudulent workers. The North Korean IT worker issue that we've talked about is a really good example of identity risk becoming a business, HR, legal, and security issue all at once. It doesn't just hit one part of the business, right?
Well, and that's where we are today. Well, I would say we've been here for a bit, that identity is a business risk management problem, right? It touches, as you said, across HR, legal, all of that. And so it also touches into governance. And we have to recognize that it's no longer just operational, no longer just back office. It's become a security problem. Those are all things we've known for probably the last 10, 12 years.
Yep.
Then it became a business risk over the last 5 years, whatever. And now, as we move to the newer part of the market, what's happening to us now, Rory?
Yeah, well, again, these things evolve, right? And a number of technologies and practices and all sorts of things have happened, meaning that rather than just talking about, human users and identity equals a person, it's become much more complex. We have employees still. We have contractors, partners, administrators, but we then have service accounts. We've got workloads, APIs. We've got bots of all sorts, automation scripts, cloud roles, and now, of course, AI agents, which is the kind of
AI agents,
the icing on the cake or the cherry on top of the icing of the cake, depending on how you look at it. Yeah,
icing or cherry. I was trying to come up with something quickly that is nefarious. I mean, agents are good tools, but something with agents. It's the evil Dark Lord robot on top. I don't know. It's potentially.
Maybe the poisoned apple. Although you don't have apples sitting on a cake, but there we go.
Yeah. One of those things. But anyway, so the phrase non-human identity sounds technical, right? But it's a straightforward concept. NHIs or non-human identities is any identity that is not a person but still needs access to do work. And we're spinning up these agents to do that.
Yeah.
They might be accessing machine accounts, workloads, service accounts, as you said. It might be a bot accessing it. It might be LLMs plus agents. These identities have been around for a while, but all of a sudden with agents, this volume is exponential.
Yeah. And had those identities that have been around for a long time being kind of governed in the same way that human identities were, perhaps we wouldn't face as much of a challenge, but they weren't always governed well. So historically you create a service account for a project, you move on from the project, but nobody actually closed that service account, or an API key might be stored in a spreadsheet, or like a code repository or a shared vault, but never deleted or never disabled. Same thing with a machine identity, might have broad access privileges because it was easier to make the application work that way, but it was never, disengaged from that. Those privileges were never switched off. So, this is not about being willful or careless. People didn't necessarily want to create that risk. It's easy to say, look, we'll do that later, or let's just finish this now, and that's not my project, whatever. It's difficult.
Yeah. Well, we had a really good chat with Rosario Mastrogiacomo. I love saying his name.
Yeah, he's a great one.
From Sphere Technology Solutions. This was a year ago. I don't know. It was a long time ago. He made a useful distinction about identity being a human being while an account is a tool used by that human to perform work. And I think it's helpful. But when we start talking about non-human identities, it gets more complicated. Yeah. The account may not cleanly map to one person. It may support an application, a business process, a DevOps pipeline, or an AI workflow, right?
Yeah, and he talked about the challenges of, what is that account and who owns it? The idea that, discovery is a foundational part of that. So,
and that's key for them, for Sphere Technology. They really focus not on the identity management, but on the discovery of what the identities are accessing.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure every organization, if they were straight, would say, look, we don't have a perfect inventory of all our accounts or credentials, permissions, service accounts, yada, yada. I think one of the points that you made this as well, was you cannot govern what you cannot find if you don't know it's there. In the same way as anything else, we've encountered this with, shadow AI, shadow IT and all these things. You can't govern something that you don't have a record of. So,
that's right.
And the same way you can't assign accountability if no human owner is tied to the account that you don't know is there because you can't find it. So it's kind of layered and nested within a really complex set of processes.
Right, but it also comes back down to the basics. I mean, just basic hygiene, and we've harped on hygiene forever.
Yeah.
So the new identity problem does not replace the old one, right? You still have to practice good hygiene, and they stack on top of each other, right?
Exactly. So it's an old problem, you know.
It is, but now let's bring agents in, right? So it's a whole different challenge.
Yeah. Do we have to bring them in? Yes, I suppose we do have to bring them in.
Must we? Well, they can be ephemeral. They can be
Yeah.
spun up for a task and then disappear. And they may need access to lots of different things. Yeah, we do have to bring them in. Sorry, Rory.
Yeah, no, we do. And we've had a few guests on the show where we've talked about, agents doing something for milliseconds,
Yeah.
and then doing something else. So
Exactly.
how do you identify that agent? Is it a task that you give them permission to do for a millisecond?
Yeah.
How do you then log what it did? Can you? I don't know if that's even possible. Should it have the same kind of permission as a human who's doing that same task? Or does it have to have its own distinct identity? Back to this idea of a tool, right? And then if something goes wrong, who's accountable?
And when we talked to SingulrAI's Shiv Agarwal, he talked about whether agents should have their own identities or inherit, right? The human ones. When I was with Cisco a couple of weeks ago, they talked about always tying agentic behavior to a human for accountability.
Right. And that kind of brings us to the topic of the discussion around zero standing privileges. So,
yeah.
I know less about this than you do, but the phrase can sound a little bit absolute zero. But we need to be careful about that. So not to imply that every organization can implement it perfectly tomorrow or in the next week. But directionally, the market is moving towards privilege that is about just in time and just enough access. So not
right. So zero trust is least privilege. That makes sense, right? We've known that for quite a while. But the zero standing privileges means if you're going to be an ephemeral identity, you can't have standing privilege to access things. You can only access them as needed for the moment that you need them. It is that just-in-time thing. It's very difficult to do.
Talk to us at this point about IBM Verify and HashiCorp Vault.
At IBM Think, I saw a demo where agents could be provisioned with dynamic provisions or permissions that end right after the task is complete. But what happens is the system returns to a human iteratively. Are you sure you want the agent to do this? They're making it simple in terms of kind of like the Authenticator app with Microsoft, to get into your O365 account. It's a phone or a laptop or desktop alert that says, Rory, are you sure you want this agent to have access right now to this again? Because what might happen is the agent goes in to provision an account and you say, fine. And then it says, well, I want this account to transfer, $25,000. And you go, oh, no, not fine. So it has to be that just in time and specific access.
Let's skip ahead slightly because there's a couple of things we should cover. One is the browser. We talked about the browser a lot. Why is the browser suddenly this kind of front line? Guests have talked about it being, the operating system for work. But, work happens inside browser-based applications. Users authenticate their agents, may use browser interfaces as slow APIs. So sensitive data is viewed, so it's copied, pasted, downloaded, and uploaded there, and that's why the browser is important. So it gives context that network level tools may not see, right? Who is the user? What application are they in? What data are they touching? Is an agent or automation tool trying to perform actions inside SaaS application XYZ or whatever? And that's why browser security and identity are becoming more connected.
And it's also why ITDR is important, that, identity detection and response, right? And that was something that emerged, 5, 6, 7 years ago. And it's about watching behavior, not just managing access, right? Is this identity behaving as expected? So that's when that came in. I think that was an important thing for agentic AI as well, is an agent taking actions outside of its intended scope?
Well, there's various other things we could talk about with that topic, but I think it's probably time that we looked at the vendor landscape, right? This is where we have talked in the past about who the movers and shakers are, who the kind of top providers are, who's acquiring, who's developing, and where the market's going. And we've done this before. We looked at endpoint vendors, security vendors, browser security companies, NHI specialists, you name it, and Old Mother Hubbard and everybody else. So talk to us, Christina. Vendors.
Well, I don't think I'm going to have a list of dark horses. And I don't even think I'm going to really have a list of who I think will be winners in this space, because identity has been a very broad, very broken problem for a long time. I think the winners will be those that connect identity to, as we've talked about, behavior, privilege, what kind of access they have to what data, the cloud posture or browser activity, how it incorporates into SOC response. But it has to be not just human, it has to be NHI. So just some companies that you and I have been talking about and we've been looking at and we're having some briefings with, Palo Alto and CyberArk. We mentioned them when they acquired CyberArk. That's interesting because I think both CyberArk and Sailpoint, that's another one I would call out, establish identity disciplines of privilege and governance. That's one to watch, kind of a strategic or large market mover. Another one would be the CrowdStrike Signal, SGNL acquisition. And alongside of Cisco, and I talked about them a week or so ago with their intended acquisition of Asterix. These folks, CrowdStrike, Signal, Cisco, they're working to get a broader security platform play, which I think is really critical. But I think, IBM also deserves a spot on the list because of the Verify and HashiCorp combination. It's a kind of an identity fabric play, right? Verify brings the identity and the access governance risk and the audit layer, but HashiCorp Vault brings the secrets, machine identity workloads, dynamic credential layer. And, from IBM Think and from some briefings, we've seen that IBM is very strongly moving into that NHI agentic identity layer. So, and I think all are, right? All of them are working towards, how do we handle NHI? But then on the newer companies, Rory, I would look at, in the modern market with this NHI agentic governance, identity posture, looking at how do we do real-time identity response. I wouldn't discount some newbies like Token, Glide, Silverfort, and Vesa. So, hopefully we'll have more on those as we proceed forward with our podcast and with our briefings, because I think it would be good to look at some of those startup companies. I mean, we're definitely talking to the bigger companies, but I think we also need to look at these other small companies that might become the dark horses over time.
If we were going to draw up a kind of a list for buyers, those who might be considering what to do with this information and where to go and who they should be talking with. So identity hygiene is the place to start, we would say. Know your accounts, know your privileged access, know your non-human identities. Make sure you assign human owners who are accountable. Reduce standing privilege where you can. Improve deprovisioning. Strengthen your multi-factor authentication and help desk controls. Then extend that model into agents and automation. And what else? What else would we get them to ask?
I think that's a big enough list.
Oh, dear.
Regular hygiene. Don't forget the old basics. And that list, I think, is sufficient. I think it's a good list, Rory. I just think you cannot forget MFA, passwords. It's boring. I think as we move forward with a lot of this autonomous security capabilities that we're beginning to see, the boring bits will get easier. The password changes, the verifying the human in the loop. It won't be the clunky, as I mentioned earlier, the Microsoft Authenticator app. It'll be something very quick and easy to verify that your agent is doing what you wanted it to do and not more.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that has been a lot to take in. However, especially if you're listening to it at one and a half times or even 2 times speed.
or 2x.
But to kind of sum up, we started with a kind of an overview, but it means that now effectively identity is extremely important within cybersecurity overall because it sits at this intersection of security, operations, AI, and governance, where they mush together.
Well, it went from operational to front and center in security as we evolved, became a critical perimeter alongside data now. And now it has accelerated into this, robotic era, this AI era, where we're going to have more identities than we have IoT. And there were predictions of, IoT for the 10 years that we were waiting for billions and billions of things to be created, which really were created. We're going to have trillions, zillions of identities. We will not be able to manage them at human pace. We'll have to manage them at machine speed.
Right. More important tasks to do. As you put it, Christina, identity isn't about access any longer. It's about accountability. And
that's a good summary right there. Good job.
Thank you, Christina, because you put it very succinctly. So thanks for that. That was awesome. And we hope folk enjoyed that. Hope it was educational, informative, and thought-provoking.
And at 2x speed, it won't be as long as it felt to us.
No. That was a great discussion, Christina, and I think we did it justice, so hopefully folks enjoyed it as well. What do we have on next week?
Yeah, we have Security Scorecard with us next week. Brandon Dobrik. He is the VP of Product.
Great.
And we're going to talk about probably how do we know what risk we have and how do we know where our risk lies. And because that's, Security Scorecard has done a good job of assessing risk for companies, especially comparatively in your industry and your customer segment. They're much more than that, though. They also have good threat intelligence. And so we'll hear from Brandon and find out more about what keeps him up at night.
Right, folks, we're going to wrap it there. If you would like to get in touch with us, please do. You can do so via email, and that would be through me, Rory, at richmondadvisorygroup.com, or...
Yeah, you can reach me, Christina, at richmondadvisorygroup.com, or if you don't want to personalize it, you can send something to info@richmondadvisorygroup.com.
As long as it's not spam, or advice on how to maximize the number of views we get on our YouTube channel. So on that note, we shall wrap this up just now. Thanks everybody for listening. I hope you can join us again next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.